My son didn't contest the trust. He had me declared mentally incompetent based on a doctor's evaluation he arranged, then had himself appointed as my guardian to gain control of the fortune I was supposed to protect. I spent 40 years on the bench, presiding over other people's family disputes. I believed I understood greed, but I never imagined I would preside over my own ruin, orchestrated in my own living room by my own son. It began after a minor fender bender. A scratch on the bumper. Julian and his associate, Isabel, descended with cloying concern. "We're so worried, Mother," Julian said, his voice slick as oil. "You're so fragile lately. We've found a wonderful new geriatric specialist." That specialist, Dr. Evans, asked me questions about current events I had no interest in, then had me count backward by sevens while distracted. He declared me suffering from age-related cognitive decline, a danger to myself and my financial well-being. "Mother, it's for your own good," Julian said, his voice dripping with a concern I now saw as venom. He waved the court order in my face. The doctor was very clear. "The stress of managing the trust is too much for you." Isabel nodded, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "We're just taking care of you, Rosa. Let us carry the burden." "The only burden here is you," I wanted to scream. But the document was real. I was a prisoner in my own life, my autonomy stripped away by a few paragraphs of legal prose. A companion hired by Julian monitored my every move. My credit cards were gone. My driver's license was revoked. I was a ghost in my own home. During a supervised outing to a new doctor, I feigned dizziness and slipped into a restroom. I scribbled a note on a paper towel with a stolen eyeliner. Marcus Thorne. Emergency. Mayrid Trust. I bribed a kind-looking stranger in the waiting room with my wedding ring to mail it. 3 days later, Marcus was at my door, posing as a financial advisor for a routine review. As Julian's companion listened from the hallway, Marcus discussed boring bond yields. But his eyes were sharp, and he subtly slid a notepad and pen toward me. I wrote 2 words, guardianship. Fraud. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. The counterattack had begun. Marcus, the CFO my brilliant Arthur had entrusted with our life's work, was a bloodhound. He discovered the trust document contained a malicious guardian clause, Arthur's final, brilliant piece of foresight. It stated that if a guardian acted against the beneficiary's interest for personal gain, their authority was instantly void, and they were personally liable for all costs. Furthermore, Marcus found a payment from a shell company owned by Isabel to Dr. Evans, a consulting fee that was a blatant bribe. We played our parts perfectly. I was the docile, confused old woman. Meanwhile, Marcus filed an emergency petition, presenting the clause and the bribe to the court. He also filed a complaint with the state medical board. The judge, seeing the evidence, appointed an independent guardian ad litem. The woman, a sharp-eyed former prosecutor, saw through Julian's scheme in a single afternoon. The guardianship was suspended. The trust was frozen. Facing total ruin, Julian made his most vicious move. He came to me, not with pleas, but with printed emails. They purported to be between Arthur and a woman named Clara, full of intimate language and references to a child. They suggested Arthur had been stealing from the trust for years to support his second family. "He was a fraud, Mother," Julian spat, his eyes wild. "A cheat and a thief. I'll release this to the press. I'll destroy the great Arthur Mingred's legacy. Reinstate me. Give me $5 million and this stays buried." For a moment, the world shattered. Arthur, my North Star, a liar? But my judge's instinct whispered, the evidence is too perfect. Marcus and I engaged a forensic expert. The emails were a clumsy forgery, their digital fingerprints leading back to a computer in Isabel's apartment. The final, glorious blow came from Marcus himself. He produced Arthur's private ledgers, showing every penny accounted for. Clara was not a mistress, but Clara's Haven, a charitable foundation for orphan children that Arthur had secretly supported for decades. We didn't just defend. We annihilated. I held a press conference. "My son attempted to blackmail me by slandering a great man," I declared, my voice the same one that had once commanded a courtroom. He sought to destroy a legacy of quiet charity. Today, I am donating $5 million to Clara's Haven in my husband's name. The public fallout was swift and merciless. The court permanently revoked Julian's guardianship and invoked the malicious guardian clause, making him personally liable for millions in legal fees. He was removed from the trust entirely. I rewrote the trust that very day, disinheriting Julian and naming Marcus Thorne as my successor trustee. They thought the law was a cage to confine me. They forgot that I hold the key. To anyone being told you are no longer capable, remember, your voice is your power. Speak your truth, and let the law be your amplifier. The gavel has fallen. Justice, finally, is served. The silence after the verdict was profound. It wasn't the empty quiet of the guardianship, but a deep, settled peace. The legal battles were over. Julian and Isabel had vanished from my life, their departure as swift and final as a gavel strike. The malicious guardian clause had done its work, leaving Julian financially eviscerated. I heard through Marcus they had moved to another state, their extravagant lifestyle collapsing into a whisper. But a judge knows that a ruling is not the end of a story, it is the beginning of a new precedent. My life had been irrevocably changed. The naive trust one had placed in blood was gone, replaced by a vigilant, clear-eyed understanding. I was no longer just Rosalind Mingrid, retired judge. I was a survivor, a precedent set in the flesh. Marcus Thorne, once just the steadfast CFO, became the cornerstone of my new life. Our weekly financial briefings evolved into a standing dinner reservation. He was the only person who understood the full weight of what had happened, who had stood in the trenches with me. We never spoke of it directly, but the shared experience was a bond stronger than any legal contract. The trust, now purified of Julian's influence, flourished under Marcus's stewardship. But its purpose felt different to me now. It was no longer just a financial entity, it was a tool for justice. I established the Arthur and Rosalind Mingrid Guardian Reform Foundation, dedicated to funding legal defense for elderly victims of predatory guardianship. We supported legislation for stricter oversight and mandatory independent assessments. I testified before state Senate committees, my voice, seasoned by a lifetime on the bench and sharpened by personal experience, commanding respect. I was turning my personal tragedy into a shield for others. This new, public role brought an unexpected visitor. A young woman approached me after a speaking engagement. She introduced herself as Anya, Dr. Evans's daughter. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. My father, she began, her voice thick with shame. What he did. I found the records. The payments. I had no idea. He's been unwell. I've convinced him to surrender his license. She handed me a sealed envelope. He asked me to give you this. It's a full confession, detailing everything Julian and Isabel pressured him to do. He's terrified of going to jail, but he wanted you to have the truth. I took the envelope, its weight feeling like a final piece of evidence being entered into the record. I didn't open it immediately. The confession was no longer necessary for my case, but it was a powerful symbol. Acknowledgement. Consequences. Later, with Marcus, I placed the unopened envelope in my safe alongside Arthur's ledgers and the final court order. For the archives, I said. He nodded. It's over, Rosa. This time, I was the one who corrected him. No, Marcus. It's complete. The story of the Mingrid Trust, of a son's betrayal and a mother's reclamation, had reached its final, unappealable judgment. The scales of justice, once brutally tipped against me, now hung in perfect balance. I had not just won back my fortune and my freedom, I had forged a new purpose from the ashes of betrayal. I looked at Marcus, my friend and protector, and at the work my foundation was doing. The law had been my cage, and then my key, and was now my legacy. The courtroom was closed. The sentence had been served. And my life, at long last, was my own to live. The final gavel fell not in a courtroom, but in the quiet of my study. The unopened confession from Dr. Evans lay in my safe, a fossil from a closed case. The Reform Foundation was running with the quiet efficiency Arthur would have admired, its work now guided by a board I trusted implicitly. My life had found a new rhythm, one of chosen solitude and deep contentment. I spent my mornings in the garden Arthur had loved, my afternoons reading, and my evenings in thoughtful correspondence with the scholars our foundation supported. On the anniversary of the verdict, Marcus came for dinner, as had become our tradition. We sat in the tranquil glow of the evening, a comfortable silence between us. He finally gave voice to the question that had hung in the air for a year. "Are you at peace, Rosa?" I looked around the room, at Arthur's portrait, at the shelves of legal texts that now felt like old friends, not weapons, at the quiet certainty of my own domain. "Yes," I said, and the word felt utterly true. They tried to rewrite the story of my life in the language of greed and incompetence. But I got the final edit. He smiled, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes. And it's a bestseller. The betrayal was a chapter, a dark and painful one, but it was not the theme of the book. The theme was resilience. It was the quiet power of the law, not as a bludgeon, but as a precise instrument of justice. It was the loyalty of a friend who became family. I had entered the crucible a retired judge and emerged as something more, a living testament to the fact that some foundations, when built on principle and love, cannot be broken. They can only be strengthened by the fire. The case of Mingrid versus Mingrid was permanently closed. And I, Rosalind Mingrid, was finally, completely, and triumphantly free. The final page of the story turned on a quiet Tuesday. The last of the legal fees had been recovered from Julian through the malicious guardian clause, the final, precise stroke of justice. The bank transfer was a whisper, not a bang, but it signaled an end I had once thought impossible. That afternoon, I sat with Marcus in my garden. The Arthur and Rosalind Mingrid Guardian Reform Foundation had just secured its first major legislative victory, a law mandating independent assessments in all contested guardianships. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We sat in the dappled sunlight, listening to the bees hum in the lavender, a deeper satisfaction settling in our bones. "It's done, Marcus," I said, my voice soft but clear in the stillness. "Truly done." He looked at me, this man who had been my fortress, and simply nodded. "He never stood a chance, you know. Against you." I thought of Julian not with anger, but with a distant, judicial pity. He had tried to use the law as his weapon, but he had never understood its soul. The law, in the hands of the just, is not a weapon. It is a scalpel. It cuts out the cancer and leaves the healthy tissue to heal. I am Rosalind Mingrid. I was a judge. I was a wife. I was a victim. Now I am simply a woman at peace in her garden, the scent of lavender on the breeze, the balance of my world restored. The gavel has fallen for the last time. The court is adjourned. And the silence that remains is not an emptiness, but a perfect, earned peace.